Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. I'm going to take the next 5 episodes and I'm going to focus on the early life of Christ. We are given just a little glimpse into the life of Christ from birth to the age of 30, where he comes onto the scene and begins his public ministry. And it's this little window of Jesus at 12 years of age. And there's so many incredible leadership principles in there for all of us, no matter what level of leader you are. We're going to learn some important things in these next 5 episodes. The first principle is this. What we're going to see is that God prepares us for what he has prepared for us. We've talked about that several times, but we're going to pick up a few extra little insights from this passage of Scripture. Luke chapter 2, verse 41. His parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to the custom of the feast. Now, again, this is the only insight that we really have into the life of Christ in 30 years. We see him at 12 years of age. Why 12? Well, there's a couple important principles here that we see is that 12 is the number of divine government. And there's a passage in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, and it says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, and of the increase of his government there will be no end." And so what we see is that Jesus, who would carry the government, the weight of the ultimate leadership position as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he would carry that upon his shoulders. And 12 throughout Scripture represents divine government. So what we see is this little glimpse of the Father preparing his Son for the weight of the divine government that has been prepared for him. Wow, isn't that just powerful? So let me just give you a couple numbers inside of Scripture that reflect that. There's 12 tribes of Israel. They governed the nation of Israel. There were 12 apostles. We see that there are 24 thrones around the throne of God inside of heaven in the book of Revelation, probably representing the 12 leadership tribes of Israel and 12 in terms of the New Testament. We see that reflected also in the 12 gates and then the 12 foundations of the New Jerusalem. So we see 12 as divine government throughout Scripture. So this is interesting. So we see this one little glimpse of Jesus. He's 30 years old when he launches ministry, but we get this just little window, this little fraction of a sliver of perspective, and it's all about the Father preparing him. So think about this. Jesus had about 3.5 years of ministry. And that means that there was basically 9 years of preparation or 10 years of preparation for every 1 year of ministry. So that's a pretty big ratio there. And I call it the iceberg principle, that what you see of an iceberg is only 10% above the surface. 90% of it is below the surface. So much of leadership today is focused on what people see, but what God the Father focuses on is below the surface, and that's the depth of the character of who we are. And so what God the Father was really doing is preparing the character of Jesus to carry the weight of leadership. I love something that someone said, I don't remember who, so I'll just take credit for it. And it was this: God, never promote me beyond what my character can sustain. Never promote me beyond what my character can sustain. So from all this, what we see is that leadership is carrying weight. We see that Jesus carried the cross on his shoulder before he carried a crown upon his head. As leaders, we're constantly carrying the weight of other people's burdens. We're carrying the weight of decisions that we have to make, all the lives that are depending upon us. If you're a leader, all the payroll that has to be met and the families that are counting counting on you to be able to make sure that they have food on the table and bills paid. There's that constant weight, the critics who are constantly criticizing what you do and all the people you have to please, all the demands that you have and not enough time to get it all done. All that is the weight of leadership. So leadership really can just be simply defined as carrying weight. You know, a lot of times I'll meet young leaders like, "Ooh, promote me. Oh, give me responsibility." And I could tell they are oblivious to actually what they're asking. And that is, it's just really going to be a bunch of weight. It's really just managing a whole bunch of problems. And so the bigger question is, are you prepared for the weight that you're asking for? I'm so glad God hasn't answered many of my prayers. And I've prayed for more, and God just goes, "I'm not giving you more because, Eric, you can't carry the weight right now." And so weight just simply means more responsibility. Today's problems are preparation for the weights that you're going to be carrying tomorrow. Just realize that every problem you encounter today, every difficult situation you face, it's simply God's gym to prepare you to carry more weight tomorrow. And I just want to remind us as a leader that as we're carrying a bunch of different weights, that at the end of the day, the government rests upon His shoulders. One of the mistakes that we make that leads to so much burnout in business, burnout in ministry, is we carry the motto, and this is not in the Bible, "If it's to be, it's up to me." That's a motto of a person on the verge of burnout, all right? That's not a biblical model. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, "Come unto me, all that are weary and heavy laden. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Now, Jesus was a master craftsman, and many theologians believe that what he created, based on the Greek words that he utilized, was that he created yokes. And yokes were customized. And the way they were designed is you would have a lead burden-bearing animal, like an ox, that would be the more mature and would be the older, that had the stronger shoulders. They would customize the yoke for that ox to actually carry a larger proportion of weight. Then they would attach a younger animal that was to be kind of trained and mentored by this older ox, and their burden would be lighter. So when Jesus is saying, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light," what he's referring to is as we're attached to Jesus, as we're following his lead, he will carry the majority of the weight. Yes, we have weight as leaders, but the weight should be more rested upon Jesus Christ. And now where we get into problems is when we start going a different direction than the lead ox. And that's why we have so many extra weights. We want to go this way. And Jesus is saying, "No, we're going to go that way." And then all of a sudden there's that tension because we're now fighting against the leading of the chief burden bearer, Jesus Christ. If you're on the verge of burnout, my question is this: what weights are you carrying that aren't yours because they belong to Jesus? And this is the value of a life surrendered. And we fight the word surrender. We don't want to surrender. It sounds like defeat. But really, for us, our victory is found in defeat when we go, "Jesus, I can't do it. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I surrender to you." And when we surrender to the cross and we surrender to Christ, our life is not our own. And then here's the great thing: every problem you have is not your own because you belong to Christ. And the reason so many of us are stressed and burned out is because it's my business. No, it's not. If you're a Christ follower, it's God's business and you're a steward of his business. This is not my church. It's God's church. And when I understand that, if it's to be, it's up to him, not me. And then it takes a significant weight off me. I can go to bed knowing there's 15 other problems to put out tomorrow. And it's okay because Jesus is the one that holds the universe together, not Eric Lawson. All right, we're going to pick up with some great insights from this important passage of Scripture about Jesus who carries the weight of government. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.